Hi folks, HR Funk here. I'm no longer a police officer, but I'm going to be talking today about some of the finest law enforcement revolvers that have ever been manufactured, so I hope you'll all forgive me for wearing one of my old shirts in honor of the occasion. This is going to be a continuation of my series on my brand new Smith & Wesson Model 19 Carry Comp revolver. And if you want to see all of the specifics about this revolver, go back and watch part 1 in this series. But in this part, I'm going to be comparing the new Model 19 to its older siblings. Going all the way back, I think the oldest one I have is a 19-3, and looking at the engineering changes that have gone into this revolver, and talking a little bit about the performance of the Model 19 Carry Comp side by side with some of the revolvers that I've had for a lot longer. So I'm going to jump right into it and show you some of the things that have changed in the new Model 19. And as I said, I'll show you some of the performance out at the range before the video's done. So a comment several of you have made in my past videos, and the question or the comment has been phrased different ways, but essentially it is, why not just look for an older Smith & Wesson revolver rather than go with a brand new Model 19 Carry Comp? And there's a couple of reasons for that. Specifically, the Carry Comp revolver is going to be taking the place of two of those that you see here in front of you. One of them is my 2.5-inch Model 19 right here, and the other is my 3-inch Model 66 back in the back there. And this might seem counterintuitive, but those are two of my very favorite revolvers. They're two of my very favorite combat magnums, and they were both manufactured in the mid-1980s. As such, they've already got quite a few years and quite a few rounds through them, and if something happens to them, it's going to be difficult to get them repaired. Parts are becoming harder and harder to find. I'm not entirely sure Smith & Wesson will even work on the revolvers that were manufactured prior to the date that they started to offer their lifetime service contract. And in fact, if I sent one of these back now and they did honor it under the service contract, they might well want to replace the revolver, which I would not want to happen. I want to keep these, and I want to keep them in very, very good condition. So I'm going to be semi-retiring these two revolvers, and in their place, I'm going to carry, or at least my plan at this point, is to carry the Model 19 Carry Comp when I want to carry a wheel gun. So here is my Carry Comp flanked by the two wheelies that it's going to be succeeding, not replacing, but succeeding. And we can see right off the bat some changes, and I'm really going to focus in on this video, or in this video rather, on the engineering changes that have led to the Model 19 Carry Comp. And this is a Model 19-9. I don't know if you can see it in the cutout there. And I'll see if I can magnify it a little bit. But this is a 19-9. As such, there have been 9 engineering changes to this revolver as compared to the original Combat Magnum, or I should say the original Model 19, because what we know as the Model 19 was in existence for a year or two prior to being given the designation Model 19, and it was known as the Combat Magnum, which, by the way, I said recently I think is one of the coolest names ever applied to a revolver. And in 1957, when Smith & Wesson changed over to their numeric designations, the Combat Magnum became the Model 19. Now, when Smith & Wesson went to those numeric designations, I've said in the past, I think they lost something in terms of personality of particularly their revolvers. And in recent years, they've tried to come back and start using names again. We hear them using the chief special name, the military and police, so forth and so on. But it almost seems like they're trying to soften the names. Because, again, these were the Combat Magnums. And if they would have been keeping in that same thread, this would probably have been known as the Combat Carry Comp. Now that would have been a cool name. The Tri-C. In fact, I might call this my Combat Carry Comp Magnum. How cool is that? The first thing that is glaringly obvious, if you'll pardon the pun, is the finish on my older Combat Magnums as compared to the new Model 19 Carry Comp. One of the first things that really caught my eye about the 2.5-inch Model 19 was this beautiful high polish bluing that it has. and it's held up very well. Neither this revolver nor my Model 66 have been what you might call everyday carry revolvers. They are revolvers that I carry once in a while, and this used to be the revolver that I would carry with me when I would go to court, because I did not have to wear my entire duty belt and vest and all that sort of thing to court. So I could pare it down a little bit and go with just a nice black leather belt and a black leather holster, and in my black leather holster was this very nice 2.5-inch Model 19. And I carried it specifically because I thought it looked good. I don't know if that ever scored me any points with a jury, but at least I felt good while I was testifying. My Model 66 doesn't have quite that level of polish, and the stainless steel revolvers really never do. But it's still a very good looking revolver in its own right. It is one of the limited production 3-inch Model 66 revolvers that were manufactured in the mid-1980s for the Ashland shooting supply. There was a small run of these. I think there were 3,000 that were manufactured. Now Smith is again making not a 3-inch, but it's a 2 3/4-inch, I think, Model 66. This is one of the older ones. You can see that I did send it away and have it magna-ported. I've also had the action tuned, and I replaced what was once a black rear notch with a white outline rear sight, just because I prefer that. But again, the appearance of these is what I'm focusing in on now. And when we look at the carry comp, this is a very utilitarian finish. As I mentioned in my initial review, I am not concerned about getting any kind of wear marks or anything on the matte black or matte blued finish. But it's just never going to look as good as these older Combat Magnums. Turning my attention to the sights, you can see that my 2.5-inch Model 19 came from the factory with the white outline rear sight and the red ramp front sight. And I was out on the range yesterday shooting all 3 of these revolvers. And one of the things that I noticed was with that white outline and that red ramp on front of both this Model 66 and the 2.5-inch Model 19, they sort of jumped out at me when I was aiming. And it was something that I think I was particularly attuned to because I had been firing the carry comp revolver up to that point with just the black rear sight, no white outline, and the black front sight. And it was really much easier to pick up my sights with the traditional white outline red ramp than with that flat black, or that black all the way around front and rear on the carry comp. Now, as I mentioned in the initial review, this does have a tritium insert in the front sight. So in any kind of low light or adverse lighting conditions, this would obviously be superior for any kind of shooting. But shooting in daylight or in what I'll call normal light, the older sights really, in my estimation, were superior. At least to my 55-year-old eyes, they were a lot easier to pick up and get a good sight picture with. Now, as I mentioned, the Model 66 originally had the same rear sight blade as the carry comp, just a flat black notch, and I replaced it with that white outline, and all these years later, I'm very glad I did, because that was just a superior sight for use under normal lighting conditions. That said, I didn't have a tremendous amount of problems aiming or getting a good sight picture with the carry comp revolver, but it was easier with the older wheel guns, and that's something that I might end up changing in this revolver as well, to at least get the white outline. I won't be able to get the red ramp as long as I have the tritium insert. Okay, let's get into the meat of this comparison, if you will. All 3 of these revolvers are manufactured using Smith & Wesson's K-frame, which is their medium-sized frame. The 3-inch Model 66 and the 2.5-inch Model 19 are both built on what I'll call the traditional or historic K-frame. The carry comp revolver is built on the re-engineered K-frame, which is just slightly larger. And This is something that I talked about in the first video, and I think I'm going to be able to show you now a little bit better. And I'm going to try to get this magnified and make it a little bit brighter. You can see right at the bottom of the barrel, right here, there is a portion of the rear of the barrel that is relieved. It's flat, if you will. So it's not as thick as the remainder of the circumference of the barrel or the forcing cone. The reason that is like that was to make sufficient clearance for the yoke and the gas cylinder to be able to close underneath the rear portion of the barrel. And I'll see if I can focus that a little bit better right there. And you can see the way the yoke and the gas cylinder are positioned there and how they're configured. And this was, I believe, the second change to the gas cylinder. This was one of the dash numbers for the engineering changes involved redoing the way the gas cylinder was arranged. And even so, even though it was redone, that was for reliability. It really didn't have anything to do with lockup. The reason this was a concern, and let me refocus this again, is because with prolonged use of very hot 357 Magnum ammunition, and the 125 grain ammunition always seemed to be the culprit for this, the barrel could potentially crack right here. And that would, of course, cause complete deterioration of accuracy and even safety as far as that goes. And really, that's one of the big reasons that the Model 686 and 586, the L-frame revolvers, were eventually designed and manufactured to do away with that problem with the combat Magnum revolvers. And if I switch over to my 2.5-inch Model 19, you'll see it has exactly the same relief at the bottom of the barrel. And this is a 19-5, it looks like. So, same exact gas cylinder, or gas seal, I should say, on the front of the cylinder. Same exact arrangement for the yoke, and the same exact lockup. When we compare this to the new Carry Comp revolver, you can see that now there is a full circumference barrel. It is no longer relieved in that area at 6 o'clock underneath the forcing cone. And we can also see that the gas cylinder, or gas seal, I keep calling it the gas cylinder, the gas seal and the yoke are now constructed differently so as to allow clearance for everything to close. And I'm going to measure this in just a moment. I've not done this yet, but I believe this new re-engineered frame is larger in this dimension, side to side, and also top to bottom. So I'm going to grab my calipers and we're going to measure this and find out once and for all if this really is bigger. So here we go. I'm going to start out with the Carry Comp first, and I'm going to measure it side to side, and I'm getting a measurement there of 0.822 inches. And when I compare that to the Model 19, it's about the same, 0.825 there. And if I can keep from knocking my camera over, I'll measure the Model 66. And a little bit bigger, 0.831. So they're all pretty close in this dimension. Now, let's check the top to bottom measurement, which is where I really suspect there is a difference. So on the carry comp, we have 0.875 going from the top of the frame to the bottom of the frame, or the cutout rather, for the crane. On the Model 19, and yes, definitely smaller, 0.850, and that's actually measuring to the top of the front sight. I would have to remove the front sight to get the true measurement, but it's definitely smaller, top to bottom, than the carry comp. And how about the Model 66? If I can get it flat there. About the same as the Model 19, so definitely this measurement for the Model 19 carry comp is larger, and that allows for that full diameter barrel and forcing cone, and it allows sufficient clearance for the crane and the cylinder to lock into place. So I'm not surprised by that. That's what I expected to find, and now I've confirmed it. So just out of curiosity, I compared this measurement from the carry comp revolver to my 686, and let's see if I can get it back where it was. It appeared to be basically the exact same measurement. There we go. As the carry comp. I think the carry comp was 0.875, this 0.876. And of course, the 686 has the full diameter forcing cone or barrel. So the new K-Comp revolver, or the new Model 19 or the new Model 66, should be able to stand up to just as much full power 357 Magnum ammunition as the L-frame revolvers. So that's actually pretty impressive, and in terms of durability, I would say that's definitely an upgrade. Now, as long as we're talking about the crane and the lockup in the frame, I want to mention this again, and once again I'm going to have to work on my focus just a little bit and brighten that. I mentioned this in my initial review, that the yoke now locks up in the frame with this ball and detent that you can see right there. And this is different. This is an engineering change because it did away with the cylinder locking at the front of the ejector rod. And see if I can change this so you can see what that looks like there. You can see there's no longer anything locking the ejector rod at the front. And when I compare this to my 2.5-inch Model 19, it's very easy to see, no ball and detent there, and we see that lock for the front of the ejector rod right there. Same thing with the Model 66. Now this ostensibly is a better way of locking the yoke into the frame, or at very least it simplifies the lockup. But one thing you'll notice when you open the revolver, and this is especially true when it's brand new, it feels like it's harder to open the cylinder, and it almost feels like there's more resistance than there should be, and it's because of that ball and detent lockup. Whereas the older revolver, or revolvers, because they both are the same in this regard, are just easier to open. Once you push forward on the cylinder release, there's really no resistance at all when you open the cylinder, but you definitely feel some resistance. I'm pushing pretty hard right there and it's not moving, and you have to push a little bit more to overcome that lockup for the yoke. A couple of smaller engineering changes, beginning with the hammer, and these are not new changes. These came around 20 or 25 years ago. Smith & Wesson did away with the hammer nose on the hammer, and it is now a frame-mounted firing pin. So the firing pin is completely contained inside this portion of the frame, as opposed to the older revolvers that still had the hammer nose and there was really nothing inside the frame other than an opening for the hammer nose to go through in order to make contact with the primer of the cartridge. Also, the means to secure the cylinder, or maybe I should say to keep it from coming off the crane when the cylinder is open, was changed. That is now accomplished by this small ridge that we see at that portion of the frame. And on the older revolvers, we can see that is different. Also, we see the traditional thumb piece for the cylinder release on the Model 19 and the Model 66. And that too is changed on the newer carry comp revolver. Again, these are not really new changes, but they are differences between the new revolver and my older ones. I don't really have a preference when it comes to the thumb piece. Either one works for me, and I don't have a problem that some people do with the older thumb pieces abrading their thumb when they're shooting. I've never had that problem, but some people do, which was the reason that was changed. Now here's a change that a lot of people really do not like, and that is the fact that Smith & Wesson went from their machined hammers, triggers, and internal parts that we have on the older revolvers here to MIM parts on the newer carry comp revolver and the other newer revolvers as well. This is something that doesn't bother me. I've heard enough people that are knowledgeable in metallurgy say that the MIM parts are perfectly fine, that I really don't worry about that. They're less expensive to manufacture, certainly, and if that helps to reduce the price of the revolvers, then I'm all for it, so long as the performance doesn't suffer. Also remaining the same are the dimensions of the grip frame that we can see best on the 2.5-inch Model 19. But if I were to remove the grips from the carry comp revolver, those are exactly the same. They've not changed. Same as with the Model 66. These are all round butt grip frames, which is what all Smith & Wesson revolvers are these days. And again, that's a change because there was once a time that some of the revolvers came with a square butt, like my Model 66 here, and others came with a round butt. Now all of the revolvers have round butts, and Smith & Wesson just changes the grips to make sure that they have the proper profile for whichever type anyone prefers. So now let's talk about barrels. One of the most visible differences, in fact probably the most visible difference with the newer K-frame revolvers as compared to the older, more traditional revolvers, is in the contour and size of the barrel. One of the things that I first thought when I first started to see the K-frame Magnums being manufactured again is the barrel looked very fat to me. It just looked like the dimensions were larger and the circumference was greater. And that's true not only with the carry comp revolver, but also the standard Model 19 that's being manufactured again. And the reason for that is because the older revolvers had barrels that were machined from one piece of steel, and then they were threaded at the rear, and they had to be screwed onto the frame, so the threads had to be timed perfectly in order to line up the front sight and all the contours of the barrel with the frame. These newer revolvers have a two-piece barrel, and this portion that you see here at the front is the only part of the actual barrel that you can see. The rest of it is contained inside of this barrel shroud. So the shroud can be machined to fit perfectly onto the frame. Then the barrel is installed and screwed into place and torqued down to hold the entire assembly together. Various people have differing ideas about this. one of the things that it allows is very tight tolerances to be kept for the barrel cylinder gap. And when I tested or measured the barrel cylinder gap of this particular revolver back in part 1 of this series, it is a very, very tight barrel cylinder gap. That was something that was much more difficult to control with these older revolvers, and I might measure these just to see how much difference there is. I know that the barrel cylinder gap of my new Model 19 is about 2.5 1/1000ths. So I'm curious how that compares to my older Model 66 and my older 2.5-inch Model 19. So my Model 66 has a barrel cylinder gap that is right at 7 1/1000ths. I tried the 8 1/1000ths feeler gauge and it would not fit, but the 7 1/1000ths does. So let's check my 2.5-inch Model 19. And the Model 19, the 2.5-inch Model 19 I should say, is coming in at 6 1/1000ths. That just fits, and the 7 1/1000ths gauge would not. So both of these are considerably larger than that 2.5 1/1000ths BC gap with the carry comp revolver. And that's also impressive, and I think it goes to show just what can be done with that two-piece barrel construction. Another quick point about the barrels, you can see the compensator that is integral to the carry comp revolver, and some of you know that my Model 66 is magneported, and I was really interested to see when I get out to the range which of these was going to be softer when it comes to recoil, and I also wanted to see how that was going to affect bullet velocity. What I expected was that the Model 66 with the longer barrel and the smaller ports was probably going to have the higher velocity. I expected the carry comp revolver was probably going to have ballistics about the same as my 2.5-inch Model 19, because really the rifled portion of the barrel stops at about 2.5 inches and then the bullet enters the compensator. So let's see how the newly re-engineered carry comp revolver compares to the older combat magnums when it comes to weight. And it's weighing in at 35.5 ounces. And I think this is slightly heavier than it was when it came out of the box because I installed these new Altamont grips. And I think they're just a little bit heavier than the factory stocks. I think the weight with those factory stocks was more on the lines of 34 ounces or 34.5. But still, 35.5 as it is currently outfitted, and comparing that to my 2.5-inch Model 19, it's 33 ounces. So the carry comp is about 2.5 ounces heavier than the 2.5-inch Model 19. And the 3-inch Model 66 is 34.2 ounces. So it's coming in a little bit more than an ounce heavier than the Model 66. So the carry comp revolver is the heaviest of the three, and with the fully underlugged barrel and the slight increase in the dimensions of the frame that we've seen in this revolver, and again these slightly heavier grips, I think contribute to that difference in weight, but it's only about 2 ounces, 2.5 ounces at greatest heavier than the lightest of the three, which is the 2.5-inch Model 19. Now, for some of you who might be interested in some of the engineering changes that took place prior to my 2.5-inch Model 19 and my 3-inch Model 66 that you've been looking at, the oldest combat magnum that I have in my collection is my 4-inch Model 66. This is from the mid-1970s, and this is a Model 66 no dash. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that the oldest revolver I had was a 19-3, and what I was thinking of is the 66 no dash is equivalent to the 19-3. The Model 19, as I said, came out in 1955. The Model 66 didn't come out until I believe 1970 or 71. So by that time, the Model 66 no dash already incorporated 3 engineering changes into the combat magnum that had already been made to the Model 19. With this older revolver, the changes that took place previously that led up to the Dash 3, the combat magnums, were fairly minor. The ejector rod was given a left-hand thread instead of a right-hand thread, and there was a change to the cylinder stops and also a change to the screw that holds the rear sight leaf. But those were fairly minor, and they're not really very easy to even see. But the most noticeable thing with the Model 66 No Dash is that it has recessed cylinder chambers. And if you look closely, and I'll try to get this so you can see it a little bit better, you'll hear sometimes people talk about Smith & Wessons that are pinned and recessed. This is the recessed part, where you can see that the chambers are relieved to allow the cartridge to sit completely inside so that the base of the cartridge case is flush with the rear of the cylinder. And on the newer revolvers, as I'll show you momentarily, you won't see that. Also, the barrel was pinned to keep it in place, to keep it from coming loose. That was done away with circa 1980. But again, that's probably the biggest visual changes. You'll also notice the gas ring, and I keep calling this thing a gas cylinder. I think it's technically a gas ring, is part of the yoke in this revolver. And as I showed you before, that was moved, and I'll go ahead and grab one of these other revolvers. That was moved to the cylinder. You can see here it is machined into the front of the cylinder. It's no longer part of the yoke. Oh, and that's another thing I keep doing. I keep calling the yoke a crane. I have crane on the brain today. This part that holds the cylinder to the revolver on a Smith & Wesson revolver is called a yoke. On Colt revolvers, they're called a crane. So that's why I keep saying that. So all of you who have caught that mistake will have to forgive me. It's one of those days. But again, when we compare this older 1970s revolver to the brand new Carry Comp, it's extremely easy to see a lot of those changes that have taken place, most of which I've already covered. And of course, the older revolvers don't have the action lock that we see right there. That didn't come around until the early 2000s, and most of us would be just as happy to see it go away again. And here's just a quick comparison of those cylinders. Again, the recessed cylinders of the Model 66 No Dash and the pinned barrel. And as you can see, by the time my Model 66-3 came around, the cylinder chambers were no longer recessed and there was no longer a pin in the barrel. So I just wanted to point that out so you could get a good visual reference on those differences. So when I got out to the range yesterday, I was very eager to shoot my 3 generations of combat magnums side by side and see what I could gather from the performance and the ballistics and the accuracy and all that. So I did something to begin with that I don't normally do. I shot them from the bench. And during that shooting, I was looking at the accuracy that I could get. Now, since these were short-barreled revolvers, I shot them from the bench from a distance of 30 feet. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, with the range where I was shooting yesterday, the bench, quote-unquote, is actually a plastic table. So I was not shooting from the sturdiest of platforms, and the groups tended to show that, which is why when I show you these groups, I'm going to give you the overall group size, and then I'm going to also give you a measurement of the best 5 shots in that group. Because I really tend to think that there was some error in there because I wasn't real steady from that shooting rest, and I don't want that to be credited to the revolvers. I want that to be credited to me as the shooter and my unsteady rest. But even so, I think the results were interesting. I also chronographed these loads, and I think those were interesting as well. So first up was the Model 19 Carry Comp. benched from 15 feet, firing a 158 grain hand load of mine. And I've got to tell you that this particular load grouped very well. In fact, it was the best load from the Model 19 carry comp. And the overall group that you see there is 1 3/8 inch center to center going from the farthest shots. And the cluster that you see here in the middle, center to center, is a 5/8 inch group for the best 5. So doing very, very well. Now this particular hand load of mine out of a 4-inch revolver is running about 1,250 feet per second. And out of the carry comp revolver, it was averaging 1,120 feet per second. So I was losing some velocity as opposed to the longer barrel, but still plenty of oomph behind that bullet to give it a lot of authority. If I didn't say before, it's a 158 grain bullet. In fact, it's a 158 grain Remington semi-jacketed hollow point that I used in that particular load. So good power, very good accuracy. The second group is with a 158 grain Freedom Munitions load. And this load, my revolvers didn't like as well, and I'm going to try to get this so you can see the group. The overall group this time around is 1 5/8 inches. Excuse me, it's 2 inches with the best 5 in 1 5/8 inches. So not bad accuracy, but not as good, obviously, as that hand load that I started out with. 1 5/8 for the best 5, not too bad from the carry comp revolver. And by the way, that Freedom Munitions load with the 158 grain bullet, it's a 158 grain Hornady XTP, and it's rated at 1,200 feet per second. And I have a strong suspicion, as you'll see here in a little bit, that that was really either overstated or measured from a very long barrel, because out of my carry comp revolver, that 158 grain Freedom Munitions Hornady XTP was clocking 930 feet per second. So that's a long way from 1,200 feet per second. And I don't think that's all because of the shorter compensated barrel in the carry comp, especially when my hand load was clocking 1,120 feet per second with a 158 grain bullet. In any case, the last load was also a Freedom Munitions load, and this is a 125 grain Hornady XTP as loaded by Freedom Munitions. It's rated at 1,510 feet per second. Again, I don't know from how long a barrel, but it clocked 1,165 feet per second, and the overall group isn't bad, 2 1/4 inches, and the best 5 out of that group went into 1 1/2 inch. So again, accuracy is looking good with the carry comp revolver. I'm not seeing any problems there. My next revolver was my 2 1/2 inch Model 19, and I expected that this was going to have very similar ballistics to the carry comp revolver. And this is one where, with my hand load right here, I had another pretty nice group out of that 2 1/2 inch revolver, and I had one flyer. And I don't think that's the revolver's fault. That's either my fault or it's the fault of that unsteady rest. In any case, the overall group is 2 3/4 inches. The best 5 are 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. So not bad for the best 5. And this was clocking 1,100 feet per second out of my 2 1/2 inch revolver. Now, as I said, out of my carry comp, that same hand load was 1,120 feet per second. So the carry comp revolver was averaging 20 feet per second greater velocity with this hand load of mine. With the Freedom Munitions 158 grain load, the 2.5-inch Model 19, put those in 2 3/8 inches with the best 5 at 1 3/4 inches. And that was clocking 900 feet per second. Again, that's less than the carry comp revolver, which with that same ammunition was, whatever I said it was before, 930 feet per second. So giving up 30 feet per second with that same load to the carry comp revolver out of my 2.5-inch Model 19. And the 2.5-inch Model 19 with the 125 grain Freedom munitions load has a group that is 1 3/4 inches, and the best 5 went into 1 1/4 inch. So not bad from that short barrel revolver, and the velocity from the 2.5-inch revolver with the 125 grain load is 1160 feet per second. So not bad, but it didn't keep up with the carry comp revolver in terms of either velocity or accuracy. The carry comp revolver was superior to the 2.5-inch Model 19. My Model 66, some of you might recall the review of that particular revolver. I said that is my favorite revolver. That's the one that I want to be buried with. And I'm going to show you part of the reason why. Look at that group right there with my hand load. It has a 1.5-inch center to center for the entire group. Very nicely centered in the target. The best 5 are in 7/8 of an inch. Outstanding accuracy. After all these years, that Model 66 is still getting it done. My velocity on that was 1100 feet per second, so it is coming in lower than the carry comp revolver in terms of velocity, but the accuracy is outstanding. With the 158 grain, if I can get the target to cooperate, the 158 grain Freedom munitions load, the overall group is 1.5 inch, best 5 is right at 1 inch center to center. Again, outstanding accuracy from that Model 66. And the velocity on that is 900 feet per second, which I think is exactly the same as I got with the 2.5-inch Model 19. Last up is the 125 grain Freedom munitions load. The overall group is 1 1/8 inch center to center, so just over 1 inch center to center, and the best 5 are in 7/8 of an inch. So outstanding accuracy from my Model 66, and the Model 66 won the accuracy competition hands down. It beat the brand new carry comp, and it beat the 2.5-inch Model 19. Did I mention I absolutely love that revolver? But in terms of power and eking out the best ballistics from that 357 Magnum ammunition, the carry comp revolver won. It had the highest velocity all the way around, and again, I didn't expect that. And I think that's largely due to the very tight barrel cylinder gap in the carry comp revolver, and I think we're seeing that translate into the velocity and therefore power that I'm getting with that ammunition. How about trigger quality? The carry comp revolver has a Smith & Wesson factory tuned action, and I've got to tell you, I said this in the initial review, it's very smooth, but it's heavy. And I think factory tuning in a Smith & Wesson revolver these days means they polish some of the internal surfaces, but they don't install lighter springs, or at least I can't tell that the springs in this revolver are any lighter. It has a 11 to 11.5 pound double action trigger pull and about a 4 pound single action pull. It is noticeably heavier than my 2.5-inch Model 19, which has a factory stock action. And again, this revolver was manufactured in the mid-1980s. It is a beautiful action. It's not had anything done to it, and it feels very, very good. It's definitely lighter in double action and in single action than the carry comp revolver, although I don't think it's any more smooth, but it is definitely lighter. My Model 66 had the action tuned by a gunsmith who's no longer with us. He was a local gunsmith here, and it has a phenomenal action. It is smoother yet than the carry comp revolver, and it's also lighter. So there's a wonderful action on this Model 66. Now that said, the carry comp revolver's action is perfectly serviceable, and again, it is smooth, it's just heavier. The other thing I'll note when comparing the carry comp revolver to the Model 66 has to do with the compensator on the carry comp and the magneporting on the Model 66. With the carry comp revolver, I very much was noticing that recoil impulse come straight back into my hand. In fact, there's a sharp edge on the side of this Ultimate grip that resulted in an abrasion on my thumb there. I don't know if you can see it or not in this light. But it did, over the course of 100 rounds, 150 rounds or so through this revolver, result in a minor injury. I think there's a little bit more muzzle flip with the Model 66 and the magneporting, but it also wasn't injuring my hand, so there's not a sharp edge on the grip panel that's on here. But I think as far as comfort goes with the rocking of the revolver, it tends to soak up some of the felt recoil a little bit more, at least to me. Whereas with the carry comp, when it's coming straight back into the palm of your hand, you're getting that recoil impulse right against your hand. Now, in terms of follow-up shots and keeping the muzzle on target, definitely the carry comp is going to win that particular contest. It's going to stay flatter, if you will, through shooting that heavy Magnum ammunition as compared to the Model 66, but it's just not quite as comfortable. So in the end, folks, I still think my 3-inch Model 66 is the winner of this competition. It had the greatest accuracy. The ballistics weren't too far behind the carry comp revolver, and I just absolutely love this wheel gun, which is why I want to keep it in the condition that it's in. So the carry comp revolver is going to succeed it, as I said at the beginning of the video, and I think it's going to be a worthy successor. It is not the revolver that the Model 66 is, but in terms of engineering and durability and shootability, it's going to be a very fine revolver in its own right. And that's going to do it for my comparison video between my new Model 19 carry comp revolver and my older combat magnums. I hope you enjoyed it. And the thing that I'll say at the end is, no, I don't have the same feelings for my carry comp revolver that I do for my Model 66 especially. That's just a special revolver. We saw in the performance today that it still did very, very well, but it's precisely because of that that I want to preserve it. And I think as a successor, the Model 19 carry comp is going to work very well as an everyday carry revolver, and it should do everything that I need it to do very well. So as I said, that's going to do it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. Also remember, warbirdbunker.com is making t-shirts for the channel. If you go to warbirdbunker.com, you can find my t-shirt there, as well as all of Nathan's other firearms and patriotic themed gear. And if you use my discount code at warbirdbunker.com, which is HRFunk for you, that'll save you 10% off your order from warbirdbunker.com. See you next time, folks. And until then, with a cool revolver, good shooting. Bye-bye.